There's a curious pattern that shows up in the lives of those who strive deeply. The harder they push, the more life seems to resist. It isn't that effort is wrong, effort is noble. But there's a point where effort quietly crosses a line and turns into control. And when that line is crossed, something subtle but significant begins to shift. Peace disappears, pressure builds, and what once felt inspired now feels like survival. Many people live in that space without realizing it. They wake up with to-do lists, chase goals with ferocity, and measure their days by how productive or accomplished they feel. But beneath all that action, something essential gets lost: presence. And without presence, even the greatest achievements feel strangely hollow. Some people learn this lesson the hard way. Sarah, for example, was once a fiercely ambitious artist. She did everything right, worked late into the night, promoted her work endlessly, hustled through burnout. But no matter how hard she tried, recognition remained just out of reach. And worse, the joy that once fueled her creativity had quietly disappeared. It wasn't until she finally let go, not out of wisdom, but exhaustion, that things began to change. She stopped chasing and started creating again, not for attention, but for honesty. And almost as if life had been waiting for her to surrender, a gallery owner stumbled upon her work and offered her a solo exhibition. The breakthrough came not from more force, but from less resistance. Stories like Sarah's aren't rare. They echo across countless lives, moments when people stopped demanding life to obey, and life, for the first time, responded. This is the paradox of surrender. When we stop trying to control everything, we gain access to a deeper kind of power. Not the power to force results, but the power to align with them, to move with life rather than against it. It's something ancient Stoic thinkers understood deeply. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Let go of your worries. Instead, let the universe work through you." To them, surrender wasn't weakness, it was clarity. It was the art of knowing what belongs to us and what never did. In today's chaotic world, that lesson is more relevant than ever. Because what if the struggle so many face is not from doing too little, but from gripping too tightly? At True Stoic Way, we explore questions like these, not to escape life, but to meet it with greater clarity and strength. If you find resonance here, you're in good company. So perhaps the real strength isn't found in holding on, but in knowing when to let go. Not in controlling the path, but in walking it with open eyes and open hands. Some people spend their lives in constant motion. Their calendars are packed, their inboxes never empty. From the outside, it looks like they're doing everything right, busy, disciplined, ambitious. But step inside their minds and a different story emerges. They feel stuck, anxious, strangely unfulfilled. It's as if all their effort is moving them forward on paper, but not in spirit. This is not laziness. It's not a lack of discipline. It's something subtler and far more insidious: resistance. Resistance isn't loud. It doesn't always shout, "Stop." Sometimes it wears the mask of productivity. It shows up as the impulse to clean the kitchen instead of finishing a draft. It whispers, "Just one more podcast," when the real work is calling. It cloaks itself in perfectionism, demanding that conditions be just right before we begin. And in doing so, it quietly steals progress while convincing us we're being responsible. Adam was one of those people. He was a writer by passion and profession, talented, thoughtful. He had a novel inside him for years. Every time he sat down to write it, something got in the way. Emails, house chores, endless research, and when he finally had a free day with no distractions, a wave of anxiety would hit, paralyzing and persistent. What if it's terrible? What if I waste my time? What if no one cares? He told himself he was preparing, that he was waiting for the right moment, but months turned into years. Resistance had become his silent companion. It's easy to assume that fear looks like running away, but more often it looks like staying busy with everything except what truly matters. Resistance isn't failure. It's not even weakness. In fact, it usually shows up when someone is on the edge of doing something meaningful. It's the tension between who we are and who we're becoming. And like all forms of tension, It can be useful if we learn how to recognize it. The Stoics knew this dynamic well, even if they didn't use the word resistance. Epictetus spoke often of inner conflict, how the things we most avoid often hold the greatest importance. They taught that the path to growth is rarely smooth or comfortable. Discomfort, when approached wisely, is a signpost, but most people don't know how to read that sign. They assume discomfort means they're doing something wrong, that they're not ready, that they should stop and wait for clarity. But clarity often comes after action, not before it. At True Stoic Way, we often say the feeling of resistance is not a stop sign, it's a signal, a call to lean in, not pull back. Consider Maya, a talented designer who had always wanted to start her own brand. She worked full-time at an agency, took freelance projects on the side, and spent weekends sketching ideas for products that felt uniquely hers. But the brand? It never launched. She told friends she needed more time, better funding, a stronger social media strategy, but the truth was simpler. She was afraid to be seen, afraid to fail, and perhaps most of all, afraid to succeed because success would mean change. Exposure, vulnerability. Resistance doesn't just arise from fear of failure. It can come from fear of success too, because to succeed is to risk transformation. And transformation, while beautiful, always costs something. Old identities, comfort zones, relationships built around a version of us that's no longer true. Resistance tries to protect us from that, but in doing so, it also keeps us small. So how do we move through it? Not by force, not by pretending it's not there, but by becoming aware of it, naming it, watching the patterns, listening closely. When Adam finally acknowledged that his busy work was just avoidance, something shifted. He didn't suddenly become fearless, but he became honest. And honesty, even in small doses, is liberating. He made a quiet decision to write just one paragraph a day. That was it. No pressure, no word count goals, just presence. One honest step at a time. In a few weeks, the novel had a heartbeat, and more importantly, Adam felt alive again. Not because he was achieving, but because he was finally engaging with the work that mattered. This is the secret truth about resistance. It shrinks in the presence of action. Not massive action, not perfect action, but aligned intentional movement. That movement, paradoxically, begins with surrender. Not surrender to resistance, but surrender of the belief that you must feel ready to begin, that you must be perfect, that you must have no fear. Those beliefs are illusions, and resistance feeds on them. The antidote is presence. Start where you are, not with everything figured out, but with one breath, one small step, one paragraph, one honest sketch, one direct email. If this resonates with your own creative or personal journey, consider joining the community at True Stoic Way. We're not here to glorify hustle, but to practice meaningful movement. There's one more thing to remember. Resistance never fully goes away. It evolves, it returns in new forms. But that's not failure, it's a sign that you're still growing, still caring, still reaching. And as long as you keep showing up, not perfectly, but truthfully, you're already further than you think. There's a gesture so simple, so ordinary, that most people never think twice about it. Yet in that gesture lies a profound truth. A clenched fist. It looks strong, it feels controlled, it's tight, focused, full of tension, ready to fight or hold on. And in certain moments, that grip can be useful. But keep that fist closed too long, and it starts to ache. It can't receive, it can't breathe. It's no longer strong, it's trapped. Now imagine that same hand slowly opening, palm relaxed, fingers loose, receptive. That image captures the essence of surrender. Not as weakness, but as willingness. Not as retreat, but as readiness. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is release their grip on what they thought they had to control. This is the paradox so many struggle with. The idea that if they stop pushing, they'll lose everything. That letting go means giving up. But true surrender has nothing to do with quitting. It has everything to do with softening into presence. And finally making space. In Stoic philosophy, the distinction is clear. We don't control outcomes. We only control our actions and our attitude. That's it. Everything else belongs to the universe, to fate, to fortune. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." To the Stoics, surrender wasn't passivity, it was mastery. And yet, in the modern world, surrender is often misunderstood. It's equated with giving up, with apathy, with weakness. But in reality, surrender requires more courage than control, because to let go is to trust. And trust is terrifying, especially for those who built their lives on planning, preparing, managing every variable. Take Layla, a tech entrepreneur who built her startup from scratch. For years, she prided herself on being in control of her calendar, her team, her product roadmap, even her personal image. She worked 16-hour days. She meditated not to relax, but to optimize focus. Every part of her life was tracked, measured, executed. But when the market crashed and her funding disappeared, so did her sense of control. The future she had crafted with such precision unraveled in a matter of weeks. And with it came a quiet breakdown. It wasn't dramatic. It was still, empty, like standing in a room after everyone had left. And in that silence, a strange question surfaced. What was I really gripping so tightly? And why? She didn't have the answer right away, but the question stayed. Slowly, she began to see. What she feared most wasn't failure. It was not being in control of how failure would look. It wasn't the fall, but the unpredictability of the fall. And that realization became a doorway. She started making space, not by abandoning her goals, but by loosening her timeline. She stopped managing every conversation. She started trusting her team. She allowed space for rest, not as a reward, but as a rhythm. And in that open space, something surprising happened. Creativity returned. So did clarity. Clients came not because she chased them, but because her energy shifted. She stopped broadcasting urgency. She started radiating calm. And people respond to calm. On the path to inner strength, awareness often begins with a question like, what am I clinging to? If you're exploring that question in your own life, you're not alone. The True Stoic Way community was created for moments like these. The truth is, most people walk through life with clenched fists, gripping ideas, expectations, images of who they think they should be, or what success must look like. They hold on to relationships long past their time. They grip tightly to timelines, career titles, social validation. And all that tension comes at a cost. Surrender then is not the loss of ambition, it's the loss of attachment to the outcome. It's the quiet, defiant choice to say, I will still show up, I will still care, but I will not strangle this moment with my expectations. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. There's another Stoic quote worth remembering from Epictetus. Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. Freedom doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing what matters, without being imprisoned by what doesn't. It means working toward a goal, while accepting that the result is not entirely up to us. It means loving someone while knowing we can't force how they feel. It means preparing well, while acknowledging that life might still take us by surprise. This is what open hands look like. Engaged, but not attached. Committed, but not controlling. Honest, but not demanding. And when we start living this way, something deep within us begins to shift. We stop bracing against life. We start dancing with it. We move from micromanagement to mindfulness, from gripping to allowing, from fear to faith. Not blind faith, but experiential trust. Because surrender is not a belief system. It's a practice, a rhythm, a daily decision to unclench, again and again. And every time we do, we make space. For peace, for intuition, for for connection, for what's real. If this message resonates, consider subscribing to True Stoic Way. Not because we have all the answers, but because we're committed to asking the right questions and living them together. So the question returns, what are you gripping today? And more importantly, what might open if you let it go? Two people can do the exact same thing and walk away with completely different experiences. One gives a presentation, nails every point, but walks off the stage exhausted and hollow. The other delivers the same message, with less polish perhaps, but walks away feeling energized, clear, and alive. The difference isn't in the outcome, it's in the energy that fueled it. There is a profound difference between action driven by fear and action born of integrity. Fear-driven action often looks productive from the outside. It meets deadlines, it earns applause, it gets results. But underneath the surface, it's powered by anxiety, by the need to prove, to protect, to perfect. It's not about expression, it's about validation. And validation is a hungry beast. It always demands more. Fear says, if I don't do this perfectly, I'll fall behind. If I don't say yes, they'll think I'm not committed. If I don't keep moving, I'll be forgotten. This kind of action is reactive. It arises from urgency, not clarity, from pressure, not peace. And while it can be effective in the short term, it always takes something from us in the long run. Our energy, our sense of self. Integrity-driven action, on the other hand, has a different rhythm. It's not about proving anything. It's about honoring something internal, something aligned. It moves from a center of knowing, not a fear of losing. It doesn't chase timelines, it follows timing. It isn't passive, but it isn't frantic either. It's deliberate, rooted, clear. When someone acts from integrity, their presence feels different, calmer, more grounded, less performative, more honest. And the strange thing? This kind of presence tends to attract more respect, not less. It speaks louder than urgency ever could. Consider Julian, a marketing executive who used to run on pressure. Every project was a sprint. Every email felt like a test. His calendar was a battlefield of back-to-back calls, constant metrics, endless pivots. And though he appeared successful, something inside was slowly unraveling. His creativity dried up. His sleep became shallow. Even wins felt empty. One evening, after missing his son's recital for the third time, something snapped. He paused, not dramatically but decisively. He spent the weekend offline. No work, no updates, just silence. In that space, he remembered who he was before the race began. The part of him that once loved branding because of story, not status. That Monday, he didn't quit his job, but he started making quieter choices. He stopped accepting every urgent task. He gave himself more space to think, and he started saying no without guilt, because now his yes meant something. The results? Slower at first, but more sustainable and more satisfying. He began to act from clarity, not compliance. At True Stoic Way, we explore this kind of inner alignment, not to escape ambition, but to ground it in something real. If you're tired of the noise, you're not alone. We're building a different rhythm. This shift isn't always visible, but it is always felt. It's the difference between rushing to meet expectations and rising to meet purpose. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus once said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." In other words, don't act out of fear of failure. Act from the clarity of who you intend to become. Marcus Aurelius, writing from the pressure-filled seat of empire, reminded himself daily, "The mind that is anxious about future events is miserable. Let not your mind run on what you lack as much as on what you have already." To them, chaos outside did not require chaos within. Stoicism teaches that while we may not control the world, we do control how we meet it. And the way we meet it, rushed or rooted, reactive or responsive, shapes our entire experience of life. Fear narrows our vision. It makes everything feel urgent, risky, and scarce. Integrity expands it. It returns us to a place where action is no longer about fixing something, but about expressing something. Not about preventing loss, but about practicing presence. And that's the real power. Not just the ability to act, but the ability to act from alignment. But let's be clear. Fear is not the enemy, it's natural. It signals that something matters. What matters is what we do with it. Do we let fear drive the car, or do we let it sit in the back seat, acknowledged but not in control? This distinction is subtle but life-changing, because when you act from fear, you build a life that's technically successful, but emotionally fragile. When you act from integrity, you build a life that's slower perhaps, but sustainable. A life that feels like yours. So how do we make that shift? First, by pausing. Before taking action, ask, am I doing this because I truly believe in it? Or because I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't? Then by breathing. Create just a few seconds of space between the impulse and the act. That gap is where clarity lives. And finally, by remembering, you are not here to perform. You are here to live, not to impress the world, but to express something true. If this reflection resonates, we invite you to subscribe to True Stoic Way, where wisdom isn't a performance, but a practice. Every moment offers a choice. Rush forward from fear, or step forward with integrity. One path leads to burnout, the other to balance. In a world that glorifies speed, stillness is often mistaken for stagnation. People fear pausing as if slowing down means falling behind. Doing nothing is labeled laziness. Silence feels awkward. Even rest must be productive. And yet for those who've tasted burnout, for those who've pushed and pushed only to feel emptier, there's a quiet realization. Stillness is not the absence of movement, it's the space where true movement begins. Call it a paradox, or perhaps a forgotten truth. The greatest turning points in life often begin in stillness. Stillness isn't passive, it's preparatory. It's not about zoning out, it's about tuning in. When someone sits in silence, not scrolling, not analyzing, not escaping, they begin to hear something else, themselves. The clamor of comparison, the endless chatter of urgency, the false alarms of fear, all those voices fade, and in their place, something subtler begins to speak. Clarity, intuition, alignment. Sophia, a successful consultant, once shared how her most pivotal life decision didn't come during a brainstorming session or a business trip. It came in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday morning when she decided to sit in silence for 10 minutes before checking her phone. No music, no meditation app, just breath. At first, she felt restless, like she was wasting time. But around the 7th minute, something clicked. A single thought arose, not dramatic, not even fully formed, just a whisper. This isn't what I want anymore. She didn't act on it right away, but it stayed. That tiny seed planted in stillness grew roots. And within a year, she had restructured her business, realigned her values, and reclaimed her health. Many in the True Stoic Way community have shared similar stories, how just 5 minutes of quiet helped them return to what really matters after years of chasing what doesn't. Stillness isn't optional, it's essential. The Stoics knew this well. To them, silence was not just a break from noise, it was a tool for wisdom. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome and student of stillness, often wrote his reflections at dawn, before the empire awoke. In his meditations, he reminded himself, nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. He didn't retreat from duty, but he did retreat inward, regularly, so that when he returned to action, he did so with clarity. Seneca, another Stoic giant, practiced deliberate solitude. He believed time spent alone in contemplation wasn't just beneficial, it was vital. He once wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality, and it is in stillness that we learn to see the difference." Today, people meditate for many reasons: stress, focus, health. But beneath all that, meditation at its core is a return to presence, a return to breath, a return to being. Because modern life pulls us away from the moment. We're trained to think forward, plan ahead, rehash the past. Stillness interrupts that pattern, not with force, but with gentleness. Stillness says, you don't have to earn this breath, you just have to notice it. You don't have to figure everything out. You just have to be here. It's in that state, present, alert, unattached, that the mind begins to unwind its knots. The nervous system softens, the grip loosens, and insight, like light through a window, starts to filter in. This doesn't require a mountaintop. It doesn't even require an hour. It starts with just a few moments of conscious pause. But here's the key. Stillness must be practiced before it's needed. People often wait until they're overwhelmed to seek peace. But like any form of strength, inner peace is built in advance. In quiet minutes, in early mornings, in small decisions to breathe before reacting. Think of it like sharpening a blade. You don't wait until the battle to prepare. You prepare so that when chaos comes, you're ready, and chaos will come. That's not pessimism, it's life. Deadlines, disappointments, unpredictable turns, they arrive for everyone. But those who've trained their minds to return to stillness are less shaken, not because they're unaffected, but because they're anchored. One breath, one pause, one moment of remembering, I am not just what I do, I am also the one who watches. This is the foundation of Stoic practice. Not detachment, but discernment. Not suppression, but stillness before response. Before your next big choice, try this. 5 minutes. Sit down, close your eyes, breathe, let your thoughts move, but don't follow. Then ask, what's true right now? It may sound simple, but that pause could change everything. And if you'd like more reflections like this, we invite you to subscribe to True Stoic Way. Stillness doesn't solve your problems, but it does change your relationship to them. It stops you from adding extra weight, from reacting to shadows, from being run by habit loops that no longer serve you. And when you return from stillness, you return clearer, softer, stronger, not in the rigid sense, but in the rooted one. Because true strength isn't tension, it's groundedness. And groundedness begins in stillness. So ask yourself, when was the last time I sat in silence, without needing to perform or plan? What might I hear if I stopped trying to manage the moment? What could become possible if I allowed space for it to arrive? You don't need a retreat, you don't need a guru. You just need 5 minutes to breathe, to notice, to return again and again. Human beings long for connection. But ironically, many of their attempts to secure it begin with control. It starts subtly, a correction here, a suggestion there, a silent expectation that someone should already know what we need without having to say it. The desire to be loved shifts into a yearning to be understood without friction. And soon, without even realizing it, one person in the relationship is trying to shape the other, not into their best self, but into their safest version. This shaping rarely comes from malice. More often, it's rooted in fear, the fear of being hurt again, the fear of not being enough, the fear that love, left to be what it is, might not last. So instead of opening to love, people begin to manage it. They hope their partner will speak more gently, be more attentive, show more emotion, or show less. They create mental checklists of how someone should act, talk, respond. And when those expectations aren't met, frustration follows. Not necessarily because the partner has done something wrong, but because they've stepped outside the frame someone else quietly built for them. Over time, the relationship becomes less about connection and more about compliance. What was once curiosity becomes criticism. What was once openness becomes orchestration. This is how many relationships begin to unravel, not through betrayal, but through the slow erosion of space. But love at its best requires space, room to breathe, room to change, room to be human. Many in the True Stoic Way community that have realized this after years of tension, when they finally stopped trying to mold their partner, they discovered a connection more real than anything they could have designed. Take the story of Daniel and Anna. They had been together for 4 years. From the outside, they looked strong, committed, aligned, even admired by friends. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. What began as mutual admiration had become subtle control. Daniel, a high-achieving engineer, had always been detail-oriented. He applied the same mindset to their relationship, planning every trip, managing every discussion, offering solutions when Anna just wanted to be heard. Anna, a writer with a more fluid temperament, began to feel stifled. She didn't always speak up. At first, she tried to fit the mold, to adjust. But the more she adjusted, the more invisible she felt. They weren't fighting, but they weren't breathing either. The turning point came during a weekend retreat. One Anna had suggested half-heartedly. During a quiet reflection exercise, she was asked to answer a single question. What part of yourself have you stopped expressing? Without thinking, the answer came, the part that isn't optimized. But later that night, she told Daniel, nervously but honestly. To her surprise, he didn't argue. He didn't defend. He listened. And then he asked something he hadn't asked in months. What would it look like if I stopped trying to improve you? That question changed everything. They didn't transform overnight, but they began a new practice, one not based on performance, but on presence. They replaced control with conversation, assumption with listening, expectation with allowance. Daniel learned that love wasn't a system to manage. Anna learned that asking for space wasn't selfish. Together, they learned that intimacy doesn't require perfection, only truth. This is the power of surrender in relationships. It's the choice to say, I love you enough to let you be. I trust that real connection doesn't need my control, it needs my presence. The Stoics understood this deeply. Though often associated with personal resilience, their philosophy extended into how we relate to others. Epictetus once said, don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do, and you will go on well. The same applies to people. When we stop demanding that someone behave as we wish, and instead meet them as they are, we stop resisting reality. And in that acceptance, love becomes less about possession and more about partnership. This doesn't mean tolerating harm. It doesn't mean abandoning your needs. It means distinguishing between needs and control, between expressing your truth and demanding someone bend to it. Because the moment we confuse love with management, we trade depth for safety. But real love is never entirely safe. It's real. And real requires courage. The courage to let someone have their own process. The courage to admit, I don't always know what's best for you. The courage to allow discomfort when someone changes and still stay open. This is emotional maturity, not just caring about someone, but allowing them the dignity of their own path. And when two people do this together, the relationship becomes something sacred. Not because it's perfect, but because it's alive. If you've ever felt tension from trying too hard to hold a relationship together, perhaps the answer isn't holding tighter, but holding lighter. True Stoic Way explores how inner steadiness leads to deeper connection. Join us if that speaks to your heart. So ask yourself, in my relationships, where am I holding too tightly? Where am I trying to control instead of connect? What expectations am I projecting onto the other person that may be mine to soften? These aren't easy questions, but they are freeing ones, because every time we release someone from our idea of who they should be, we give them the chance to show us who they truly are. And sometimes, often, that version is far more beautiful than anything we could have imagined. Expectation is one of those things we carry quietly. It rarely announces itself with fanfare or flashing lights. Instead, it hides beneath goals, within relationships, inside our timelines and dreams, whispering how things should go, how people should act, how life should unfold. And when life doesn't match the script we've written in our heads, we don't just feel disappointed, we feel betrayed. But who betrayed us? Life? Or the illusion we constructed about how life was supposed to look? That's the hidden weight of expectation. It distorts reality. It places invisible demands on the future, turns present moments into performance tests, and warps our perception of success, love, and self-worth. It tells us you should be further along by now. They should understand you without asking. If it doesn't happen soon, maybe it never will. And all the while, peace becomes conditional, tied to outcomes, deadlines, people's behavior, or our ability to control things we were never meant to control. Consider this. Most people don't suffer from what is. They suffer from what they expected to be. Jenna, a 35-year-old architect, once believed that by now she'd have her dream house, a husband, 2 children, and a perfectly balanced life. Instead, she was single, renting, and rethinking her entire career. On paper, she wasn't behind, but in her mind, she was drowning. Why? Because her internal clock wasn't set by truth. It was set by expectation. A timeline inherited from culture, family, social media, and self-comparison. Every year that didn't match the picture in her head felt like failure. And that's what expectations do. They turn ordinary seasons of change into crises of identity. But here's what shifted for Jenna. After months of wrestling with anxiety and guilt, she decided to pause. Not her life, but her inner narrative. She asked herself a simple, powerful question. What if none of this is wrong? Not rhetorical, not sarcastic, a genuine curiosity. What if the path she was on, however messy, however different, wasn't a mistake, but a redirection? And with that, something loosened. She didn't abandon her dreams, but she released the demand that they happen in a specific way, on a specific timeline, according to a script that no longer fit who she was becoming. Many in the True Stoic Way community have experienced similar freedom, not by lowering their standards, but by softening their expectations. And in that softening, they discovered space to breathe again. The Stoics warned against rigid expectation long before self-help books existed. Seneca once wrote, "He suffers more than necessary who suffers before it is necessary." In other words, we often hurt ourselves by rehearsing pain that hasn't arrived, pain imagined through the lens of expectation. They taught that peace isn't found in perfect outcomes. It's found in living with presence, responding with wisdom, and releasing attachment to what cannot be controlled. This doesn't mean giving up goals, or never planning, or pretending we don't care. It means holding our vision with open hands. It means understanding the difference between direction and obsession. It means being committed to the process without being imprisoned by the plan. Because the truth is, life rarely gives us what we expect, but it often gives us what we need to grow. So what does living without rigid expectation actually look like? It looks like setting goals and being okay if the path changes. It looks like loving someone and not needing them to play a specific role to make us feel whole. It looks like showing up every day with full effort, but without tying our self-worth to results. It's fluid, not flaky, tensional, not rigid, grounded, yet free. That freedom isn't theoretical, it's felt. You notice it when you stop checking the clock during a project because you're genuinely immersed. You feel it when someone cancels plans and instead of spiraling, you smile and enjoy the space. You live it when you stop measuring yourself by how far you've gone and start honoring how deeply you've grown. That's the difference between pressure and presence. And presence changes everything. It changes how we love because we're no longer trying to script affection. It changes how we work because we're no longer proving, just contributing. It changes how we breathe because finally we've let go of the internal tension that said, "You're not there yet. Try this today." Identify one area where your expectations are creating stress. Write it down, then ask yourself, what part of this can I release just for now? And if reflections like this resonate, subscribe to True Stoic Way, where we explore practical ways to turn inner clarity into everyday strength. Because when we live from presence rather than pressure, we begin to trust the unfolding. We begin to notice what life is offering, rather than constantly chasing what it hasn't delivered yet. And more often than not, what life offers us, unexpected, unscripted, is better than what we thought we wanted. It's not always bigger, or flashier, or faster, but it's more real, more grounded, more ours. So ask yourself gently, what expectations am I still gripping? Are they helping me grow or holding me hostage? What might become possible if I live from presence instead? Because letting go of expectation isn't about settling. It's about creating space for something truer to arrive. There's a moment in every person's life, usually quiet, often unnoticed at first, when they realize that the more they try to force things, the more life resists. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in the patterns. The conversations that never go as planned, the opportunities that slip away at the last moment, the exhausting cycle of chasing, fixing, optimizing, and still feeling like something's missing. That's when a different kind of question begins to surface. What if trying harder isn't what I need? To many, that question feels dangerous. They've built their identity around effort, around pushing, around proving. So to let go, even a little, feels like weakness. like failure. But the truth is, surrender doesn't take your power away. It gives it back. Because when you stop fighting the current of life, you free your energy to actually move with it. And that's when things begin to change. Not because you gave up, but because you got out of your own way. Take Noah, for example. He had been applying for the same high-level role for over a year, sent dozens of applications, networked obsessively, fine-tuned every cover letter, adjusted his strategy monthly. He even practiced visualization, hoping to manifest the outcome. But despite his efforts, every lead dried up, every interview stalled. The silence was deafening. One evening, after yet another rejection, he did something unusual. He stopped. Not dramatically, not in defeat, just stopped. He closed his laptop, put away his planner, and went for a walk. Not to clear his head, not to think of a new plan, just to walk, to feel his breath, to watch the trees move in the wind, to be without an agenda. And in that pause, something shifted. Not externally, internally. For the first time in months, Noah felt a strange kind of peace. Not because he had solved anything, but because he had let go of the need to solve everything. That night, he made a quiet promise to himself: I will still pursue my path, but I will no longer chase it out of fear. He adjusted his routine, focused less on results, more on presence, allowed space for enjoyment again. He returned to mentoring, a passion he'd set aside while hustling, reconnected with old friends, laughed more. And 3 weeks later, a recruiter contacted him, unexpectedly, not from any recent application, but from a conversation he had had 6 months ago. They had an opening, one that aligned not just with his resume, but with his values. The role he thought had eluded him had found its way back on its own time. Coincidence? Maybe, but maybe not. Because something happens when we stop swimming upstream. We stop blocking what's already trying to reach us. This is what alignment feels like. Less like a push, more like a pull. Less tension, more trust. At True Stoic Way, we often say, you don't have to force what's meant for you. You just have to become the kind of person who can receive it. To live in alignment doesn't mean doing less. It means doing what's yours to do and releasing the rest. It means trading urgency for awareness, swapping fear for clarity. It means asking not just, how do I get this? But is this really for me? The Stoics called this living according to nature. Not nature as in trees and rivers, but nature as in order. Wisdom, harmony. Epictetus reminded his students, don't seek for everything to happen as you wish it would, but rather wish that everything happens as it actually will. Then your life will flow well. Flow is the opposite of resistance, not because it avoids effort, but because it aligns effort with timing. Imagine rowing a boat with the current. You still have to steer, you still have to paddle, but the river is helping you. You're not draining yourself trying to control the water. You're cooperating with it. That's how aligned effort feels. And here's what most people don't realize. You can be incredibly disciplined and deeply surrendered. They're not opposites, they're allies. Surrender gives you direction. Discipline gives you movement. Together they create momentum, not frantic, but focused. So how do you know when you're out of alignment? You feel it. Your body tenses. Your energy drains. Everything feels heavier than it should. You're exhausted before the day begins. You're frustrated even when things work. You're chasing outcomes that no longer feel true. These are signs, not of laziness or failure, but of misalignment. And the invitation isn't to quit, but to realign, to pause and ask, what am I forcing right now? Is this action rooted in fear or in integrity? What might unfold if I stopped gripping so tightly? Sometimes the very thing we think we have to chase is already on its way, but it needs us to be present enough to receive it. If you're tired of fighting the current, of forcing what doesn't feel natural anymore, consider this your invitation. Pause, breathe, realign. At True Stoic Way, we're learning one breath at a time to live from trust, not tension. Because when you live in flow, you stop overthinking every conversation. You stop attaching your identity to results. You start enjoying the process again. Not as a strategy, but as a way of being. And strangely, that's when life begins to respond. The right people arrive, the right ideas return. The clarity that once seemed elusive begins to surface. Not because you demanded it, but because you made space for it. So maybe the most powerful question isn't, what should I do? Maybe it's, where can I stop fighting? Because peace doesn't always come from solving. Sometimes it comes from surrendering. At some point in every journey, the seeker stops seeking, not because they've given up, but because they finally realized what they were chasing was never truly out there. It was already within. That shift is quiet, gentle, but it changes everything. Because what if peace doesn't arrive when everything's in place, but when we stop insisting that everything has to be? What if the real strength we've been looking for isn't found in domination, control, or certainty, but in presence, awareness, and the courage to surrender? The journey we've taken together through resistance, expectation, fear, stillness, and flow has led us to one simple but powerful truth. You don't need to fight life to live it fully. When you loosen your grip on outcomes, you reclaim your energy. When you soften your demands, you rediscover joy. When you stop controlling others, you begin to connect authentically without armor. When you pause long enough to hear yourself again, you find direction not through force, but through clarity. That is the essence of living with life, not against it. And this isn't a one-time revelation. It's a practice, a way of returning again and again to your center. Sometimes you'll forget, you'll tighten your grip, you'll rush, you'll fear. That's okay, that's human. But the moment you remember, you can breathe again. You can soften, you can trust, you can begin again. At True Stoic Way, we believe that returning to yourself is the most courageous journey you can take. And you don't have to walk it alone. If this message resonated with you, if something inside you whispered, "That's me," then we invite you to stay connected. Because this isn't just philosophy. It's not just content. It's a way of being, a way of living with steadiness in chaos, presence in pressure, and quiet strength in a noisy world. Subscribe to True Stoic Way. If you're ready to stop performing and start showing up honestly, you're tired of overthinking and craving inner stillness. You've been chasing something outside of you, and you're ready to come home to yourself. Here, we don't shout, we don't preach, we reflect, we ask better questions, we listen, and we grow, one quiet shift at a time. So take one last breath with us now, feel it arrive, feel it leave. And as you return to your day, remember, you don't need to force what's meant to flow. You don't need to chase what's already finding its way to you. Let life meet you right here, right now, with open hands, with steady breath, with trust. Welcome to the True Stoic Way.